Everyone found a match, but the alien vampire queen was overlooked until a human extended his hand. Part 2. Seraphale remembered the first time she came to the Concord Gala. She had been queen for only 40 years then, still young by Noctari standards, still carrying the hope that the galaxy might see her people for what they truly were. She had prepared for months. She had learned greetings in 6 different languages. She had chosen a gown that dimmed the glow of her veins so she would not frighten anyone. She had practiced smiling in a way that did not show her teeth, because her teeth were sharp, and she knew what sharp teeth meant to other species. She had walked into the grand hall with her back straight and her heart open, and she had watched every single delegate step away from her. The Elawari had been polite about it. Their senior diplomat had bowed and explained that the Noctari biosignature interfered with their photosynthetic processes. It was a lie. Seraphale could sense the chemical changes in his bark skin. He was afraid. The Cathori had not even bothered with politeness. Their lead delegate had turned his back and walked away without a word. The Vreen had sent a junior aide to explain that cultural differences made a pairing impossible at this time. The aide's water suit had been trembling the entire time he spoke. By the end of that first gala, Seraphale had stood alone in the grand hall, while 200 pairs walked past her. She had returned to Umbrath and sat in her private chamber in the dark for 3 days without speaking to anyone. Her attendants had waited outside her door in silence because they understood. On Umbrath, grief was not spoken, it was held. She went back the next time, and the time after that. Each gala was the same. The faces changed, but the distance did not. Species that had never even met a Noctari refused her based on stories they had heard. The creature from the dark world, the one with glowing veins and red eyes and sharp teeth, who fed on living things. It did not matter that humans ate the flesh of animals. It did not matter that the Cathori consumed their own dead as part of their mourning rituals. It did not matter that the Elawari absorbed nutrients from soil that contained the decayed remains of other organisms. Every species had its way of surviving. But the Noctari way looked wrong to others, and looking wrong was the only crime the galaxy never forgave. Her general, Valith, had stopped hiding his anger years ago. He was old, older than Seraphale, with deep scars running across his face from a war fought before the Accord existed. He had never trusted the other species, and he did not pretend to. "Stop going," he had told her before this gala. They had been standing in the command hall on Umbrath, the canyon walls rising around them, the bioluminescent gardens casting soft blue and violet light across the stone floor. "You stand there like a beggar, waiting for scraps from species that are not fit to speak your name. It is beneath you. It is beneath us." Seraphale had looked at him calmly. "If I stop going, they will say we chose to leave. They will say we were the ones who turned away, and every fear they have about us will become true in their minds." "Let it," Valith had said. "Let them fear us. Fear is honest. Their smiles are not." "I am not looking for their smiles," Seraphale had replied. "I am looking for one hand, just one. That is all it would take." Valith had shaken his head and walked away. He thought she was foolish. She sometimes thought he was right. But she went to the gala anyway. Now she stood on the observation deck of Hearthpoint, watching the stars burn in the black, and she felt the familiar weight settle onto her shoulders. 200 years of ruling alone. 15 years of standing in halls full of beings who would not look at her. She was tired in a way that sleep could not fix. It was the tiredness of being unseen, of existing in a room full of people and being treated like empty space. She had noticed the human watching her the previous night, the young one with the messy hair and the curious eyes. She had expected him to look away when she noticed him. Every other species did. They would glance at her, realize what she was, and turn their heads as if they had been looking at something else the whole time. But the human had not looked away. He had kept watching with an expression she could not quite read. It was not fear. It was not fascination. It was something quieter than both. Something that looked almost like recognition. She did not know what to make of that. The political briefings that day brought more of the same. The Cathori were pushing a proposal to restructure the energy corridor that ran through Sector 9. The proposal was written in careful diplomatic language, but Seraphael saw through it immediately. The restructuring would cut the Noctari off from the energy supply they needed to maintain their environmental systems on Earthpoint. It was not an attack. It was an erasure. The kind of quiet violence that left no marks and required no weapons. She could fight it. She could stand before the council and argue her case. But she had done that before, and the council had listened politely and done nothing. The Cathori had more trade partners, more allies, more voices willing to speak on their behalf. The Noctari had none. Seraphael stood on the observation deck and watched the stars, and thought about the violet flowers in her garden back home. They only bloomed in total darkness. The moment any light touched them, they closed. Not because they were weak, because they were made for a different kind of world. She wondered if the galaxy would ever stop trying to drag her into the light, and simply learn to see in the dark. Behind her, the grand hall hummed with laughter and conversation, and the sound of alliances being formed. Ahead of her, the stars burned cold and silent, and very far away. And somewhere, on the station, a young human named Danny Calloway was reading everything he could find about a flower that bloomed in the dark. Everyone found a match, but the alien vampire queen was overlooked until a human extended his hand. Part 3. 2 days before the pairing rite, Danny sat in the small room the humans had been given on Deck 7 and read about the Noctari until his eyes burned. He learned that their cities had no artificial lights. He learned that their language had 14 different words for darkness, each describing a different quality. One meant the darkness of safety. One meant the darkness of grief. One meant the darkness that comes just before something beautiful happens. He learned that on Umbrath, the most important gesture of trust was an open palm held upward, exposing the pulse point on the wrist, because Noctari could sense the rhythm of another being's heartbeat through skin contact. To offer your pulse to a Noctari was to say, "Here is my life, beating and bare, and I am not afraid to let you feel it." He put the datapad down and stared at the ceiling for a long time. The next morning, he went to see Ambassador Marsh. She was in the delegation's meeting room, reviewing trade proposals on 3 separate screens. She did not look up when he walked in. "Ambassador," Danny said, "I want to offer my hand to Queen Seraphael for the pairing rite." Marsh stopped reading. She looked at him over the top of her glasses. "Say that again." "I want to pair with the Noctari Queen." Marsh leaned back in her chair. She studied him the way she studied everything, carefully, looking for the angle. "You understand what that would mean. The Cathori are already looking for reasons to block our trade access. Half the delegations on this station think the Noctari are dangerous. If a human pairs with their queen, every species here will have an opinion about it. And most of those opinions will not be kind." "I know," Danny said. "You are a junior attaché. This is your first mission. If this goes wrong, it will not go wrong for me. It will go wrong for you. Your career, your reputation, your future in the diplomatic corps. All of it." "I know," Danny said again. Marsh watched him for a long moment. Then she took off her glasses and set them on the table. Why? Danny thought about it. He could have given the diplomatic answer, that it served human interests to build bridges with an isolated species. He could have given the academic answer, that the pairing rite was meant to be a genuine act of unity, and the Noctari's exclusion was a failure of the system. Both of those things were true. but they were not the reason. Because nobody else is going to, he said. Then she put her glasses back on and turned to her screens. If you do this, it is on you. I will not stop you, but I will not protect you either. Understood, Danny said. He turned to leave. Calloway, Marsh said without looking up. For what it is worth, I think you are either the bravest person on this station or the dumbest. I have not decided which. Danny smiled. I will let you know when I figure it out. That evening, he found Seraphael on the observation deck. She was in the same spot as before, standing near the far windows where the starlight was dimmest. He walked toward her slowly, keeping his movements calm and visible. He knew from his research that Nocthari could hear heartbeats from several feet away, so she already knew he was coming. She already knew he was nervous. There was no point pretending otherwise. He stopped about 6 feet from her. Your Majesty, he said, my name is Danny Calloway. I am with the human delegation. Seraphael turned her head to look at him. Her crimson eyes caught the faint starlight and held it. Up close, she was even more striking than he had expected. The glowing veins beneath her skin pulsed slowly, like a second heartbeat made of light. Her expression gave nothing away. I know who you are, she said. Her voice was low and smooth, like stone worn soft by water. You are the one who has been watching me. Danny felt his face go warm. I did not mean to be rude. You were not rude. You were curious. There is a difference. She turned back to the stars. What do you want, Danny Calloway? He took a breath. I want to talk, if you will let me. She was quiet for so long that he thought she was going to send him away. Then she said, What do you want to talk about? Umbrath, he said, your gardens, the Veileth flower. I read that it only blooms in complete darkness. Something shifted in her expression. It was small, barely visible, but Danny caught it. A crack in the wall. Not pain, but surprise. You read about the Veileth? I read everything I could find about your world, Danny said. I know that is probably strange. It is, she said. No one from another species has ever asked me about the Veileth. They ask about our feeding habits. They ask if we sleep in the ground. They ask if light can kill us. They never ask about flowers. The flowers seemed more interesting, Danny said. Seraphael looked at him again, and this time her expression was different. The wall was still there, but the crack was wider. The Veileth is the most sacred plant on Umbrath. It grows only in the deepest parts of the canyon gardens where no light has ever reached. Its petals are thin enough to see through, and they glow with a light that comes from within. When it blooms, it fills the dark with color, but the moment any outside light touches it, it closes. It is not afraid of the dark, Danny said quietly. It is made for it. Seraphael stared at him. The glow in her veins pulsed once, brighter than before, then settled. Yes, she said, that is exactly right. They talked for 2 hours. Danny told her about Earth, about moonflowers that only opened at night, about deep-sea creatures that made their own light in the blackest parts of the ocean. Seraphael told him about the twilight cities, about the way Noctari children learned to navigate by feeling vibrations in the stone, about the songs they sang in frequencies too low for most species to hear. When Danny finally left, Seraphael watched him go. Then she turned back to the stars, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, the weight on her shoulders felt a little lighter. The day of the pairing rite arrived. The grand hall was packed. Delegates stood in their finest clothing, arranged by species, waiting for the ceremony to begin. One by one, pairs stepped forward, joined hands or claws or tendrils, and bowed to the assembly. The Elowari paired with the Vreen. A small mammalian species called the Fenori paired with a delegation of crystalline beings from the outer rim. Ambassador Marsh stepped forward with the Elowari trade minister and clasped his massive wooden hand in both of hers. The ceremony moved on, pair after pair. The hall grew louder with applause and murmured approval. Seraphale stood alone at the far side of the hall. She wore a gown of deep black, and the glow beneath her skin was dim, pulled inward, controlled. Her face showed nothing. She knew how it ended. Then the hall went quiet. Danny Calloway stepped out from the human delegation and walked across the open floor. His footsteps echoed in the sudden silence. Every eye in the room turned to watch him. The Cathori delegation shifted and clicked. The Elawari murmured. Ambassador Marsh kept her face perfectly still. Danny stopped in front of Seraphale. He looked up at her, because she was nearly 2 feet taller than him, and he held out his hand, palm up, pulse exposed. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The gesture said everything. Seraphale looked down at his hand. She could hear his heartbeat. It was fast. He was scared. But his hand did not shake. His eyes did not waver. 200 years, 15 years of standing in this hall. Every delegate, every species, every gala. She had waited for this moment for so long that she had stopped believing it would come. Her skin was cool against his warmth. Her fingers were long and careful. The veins beneath her skin pulsed once, bright and sudden, like a light turned on in a dark room. The hall was completely silent. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single pair of hands began to clap. Then another, then another. It was not thunderous, it was not a standing ovation, but it was real, and it was enough. Danny looked up at Seraphale and smiled. She did not smile back, not yet, not in front of all these watching eyes. But the glow beneath her skin said what her face would not. It was warm, it was steady. It was the light of a flower blooming in the dark. Everyone found a match, but the alien vampire queen was overlooked until a human extended his hand. Part 4. The trouble started before Danny even left the Grand Hall. The Cathori delegation filed a formal protest within the hour. Their lead representative, a tall insectoid named Sharath, stood before the Accord's Mediation Council and declared the pairing a calculated provocation by the human government. He said it was a political move designed to create a secret military alliance with the Nakhari. He said the humans had no respect for the traditions of the right. He said the pairing should be declared void. Danny was called before the council the next morning. The chamber was circular, with seats rising in tiers around a central floor. Representatives from 12 species sat above him, watching with expressions that ranged from curious to hostile. Shirath stood on the opposite side of the floor, his black shell gleaming under the council lights, his many legs clicking against the stone, in a rhythm that Danny had learned was a sign of aggression. "State your purpose in selecting the Nakhtari queen," the council's presiding officer said. She was an Elawari, her bark skin covered in small blue flowers that only bloomed when she was calm. Right now, the flowers were closed. Danny stood straight. "I chose Queen Seraphale for the pairing rite because the rite is supposed to represent trust and unity between species. The Nakhtari have been part of this accord for 15 years. In that entire time, no one has ever offered their hand to their queen. I thought someone should." Shirath clicked sharply. "You are a junior member of your delegation. You have no authority to make such a gesture. This was not your decision to make." "The pairing rite is a personal choice," Danny said calmly. "It always has been. Any delegate can choose any other delegate. There is no rule that says otherwise." "I checked." The council murmured. Shirath's legs clicked faster. "The human is naive. He does not understand what the Nakhtari are. He does not understand the danger." "What danger?" Danny asked. "Queen Seraphale has attended every gala since her species joined the Accord. She has never threatened anyone. She has never broken a single rule. The only thing she has done is stand quietly and wait for someone to treat her like she belongs here. If that is dangerous, that I think we need to talk about what we are really afraid of. The council did not void the pairing, but they did not endorse it either. They issued a neutral statement and moved on to other business. Danny left the chamber knowing that he had not made any friends. Back in the human quarters, Ambassador Marsh was fielding calls from Earth. The diplomatic council wanted answers. 3 trade partners had expressed concern. A news network back home was running a story with the headline, "Human Diplomat Makes Alliance with Alien Vampires." And the comments underneath were exactly what Danny expected. "You have made my life very difficult," Marsh told him. She was standing by the window, arms crossed, watching the stars the same way Seraphael did, though Danny suspected she was not thinking about flowers. "I am sorry, Ambassador." "No, you are not," Marsh said. She almost smiled. "Go make yourself useful somewhere. I have damage control to do." On the Nocthari side of the station, things were not much better. General Valeth had been pacing the corridors of their section since the ceremony. His scarred face twisted with something between anger and shame. "You let a child from a species that has barely left its own planet stand before the galaxy and claim you." They were in the Noctari command room, a dark space lit only by the soft pulse of bioluminescent panels. "You are the queen of the Noctari. You do not need the charity of humans." "It was not charity," Seraphael said. "Then what was it?" Seraphael was quiet for a moment. He offered his palm, pulse up. He knew what it meant. He studied our customs. He learned our language of gesture. "That is not charity, Valeth. That is respect." "It is weakness," Valeth said. "Accepting the hand of a lesser species makes us look desperate." "We are not lesser or greater," Seraphael said, and there was an edge in her voice that made Valeth go still. "We are alone. We have been alone for 15 years on this station. I am tired of calling that strength." Then he turned and walked out without another word. 2 days later, the station shook. It started with a low vibration that ran through the walls, followed by the lights flickering in the human quarters. Danny grabbed the edge of his desk as the floor tilted slightly, then righted itself. Alarms began to sound, not the sharp ones that meant hull breach, but the deep, slow ones that meant system failure. The station's energy grid was collapsing. The main power conduit that ran through Sector 9 had been destabilized, and without it, the environmental systems across half of Hearthpoint were failing. Temperature controls, atmospheric processors, gravity regulators, all of them were shutting down in sequence. The cause was found within the hour. The Cathori had been quietly diverting energy from the Sector 9 corridor to boost their own section of the station. They had been doing it for days, slowly, carefully, just enough to weaken the system without triggering an immediate alarm. It was the energy corridor that their proposal would have officially rerouted. They had decided not to wait for the vote. The worst damage was in the Noctari section. Their environmental needs were the most specific on the station. They needed low light levels, a particular atmospheric mix, and temperatures well below what most species found comfortable. When the power failed, their section was the first to become unlivable. The air began to thin. The temperatures started to rise. The bioluminescent panels that lined their corridors flickered and went dark. Danny heard about it from a Vreen engineer in the corridor outside his quarters. He did not wait for orders. He grabbed a portable breather unit from the emergency locker and ran. The Noctari section was dark when he arrived. Not the comfortable dark of their homeworld, but a wrong dark, the kind that came from broken systems and failing power. Noctari engineers were working by the faint natural glow of their own skin, moving quickly through corridors that were already too warm for them. Danny found the lead engineer, a quiet Noctari woman named Thelis, and told her he was there to help. Thelis looked at him with her red eyes and said nothing for a moment. Then she handed him a set of tools and pointed down the corridor. "Conduit access panel, Section 4. The coupling has fused. I need it opened. Danny nodded and ran. He worked for 6 hours in the dark. He followed instructions from Nocthari engineers, crawling through access tunnels that were built for beings taller than him, carrying components that were heavier than they looked. He burned his hands on a fused relay. He cracked his head on a low beam. He kept going. In the Noctari command room, Seraphiel was coordinating the emergency response. She stood over a holographic map of the station, her hands moving across the display, rerouting what little power remained. She was calm. She was precise. She had spent 200 years ruling a world that existed on the edge, between light and dark. Crisis was not new to her. But the math was not working. There was not enough power to restore the environmental systems. Not unless she pulled energy from somewhere else. She looked at the map, the bioluminescent gardens, the most sacred space on Umbrath, and their small piece of home on Hearthpoint. The gardens drew significant power to maintain the conditions the plants needed. If she diverted that power to the atmospheric processors, the gardens would die. Every plant, every flower, every Valith bloom that had taken years to cultivate in this alien place. She gave the order without hesitation. The power rerouted. The atmospheric systems stabilized. The air cleared. The temperature dropped back to livable levels. Across the Nocthari section, people who had been gasping for breath felt the cool air return and sank to the ground in relief. And in the garden bay, the lights went out for the last time, and the Valith flowers closed their petals and began to wither in the rising heat. When the crisis was over and the station was stable again, the Accord Council held an emergency session. The Cathari sabotage was exposed. Chiroth tried to claim it was an unauthorized action by lower-level engineers, but the evidence was clear. The Council censured the Cathari delegation and stripped their voting privileges for the remainder of the gala. And for the first time in 15 years, the Council formally acknowledged the Nocthari's contribution. Seraphiel had sacrificed her people's most sacred space to save a station full of species who had never once offered her a hand. Danny stood in the back of the council chamber and watched Seraphiel accept the acknowledgement with the same quiet composure she had carried to every gala. She did not gloat. She did not demand apologies. She simply nodded and said, "We are part of this accord. We acted accordingly." Valith stood behind her, and for the first time, the old general's expression was not anger. It was something closer to pride. Everyone found a match, but the alien vampire queen was overlooked until a human extended his hand. Part 5. The days after the crisis were strange. The station was repaired. The energy grid was restored. The Cathari delegation left early, escorted to their shuttle by Accord security, while Chirath clicked furiously and refused to look at anyone. The remaining delegations returned to their negotiations, but something had shifted. The air on Hearthpoint felt different, not in the way the atmospheric processors measured, but in the way people moved through the corridors, and the way they looked at each other. Species that had avoided the Noctari section for 15 years now walked through it on their way to meetings. A group of Fenori diplomats stopped outside the ruined garden bay and stood in silence for a long time, looking at the withered remains of the plants through the observation window. An Elowari trade minister named Gorath, the same one who had paired with Ambassador Marsh, made a formal visit to Seraphiel's quarters. He stood before her, his massive frame bent slightly in the Elowari gesture of deep apology, and told her that his people had been wrong to keep their distance. He said the Elowari Council had voted to open direct trade negotiations with Umbrath. He said he was sorry it had taken this long. Seraphiel accepted his words with grace. She thanked him and offered him a seat. They talked for an hour about trade routes and resource sharing, and when Gorath left, he told his delegation that the Noctari Queen was one of the sharpest minds he had ever spoken with. He said he felt ashamed that he had let fear keep him from learning that sooner. Other delegations followed. The Vreen sent a formal invitation for Noctari scholars to visit their Waterworld research stations. A collective of smaller species from the Outer Rim proposed a cultural exchange program. The offers were careful, tentative, and not all of them were sincere. Some were clearly motivated by politics, by the desire to be seen standing with the species that had just saved the station. Seraphael knew the difference. She accepted the genuine ones, and politely declined the rest. But she was not interested in becoming popular. She had not sacrificed her gardens to win approval. She had done it because it was the right thing to do, and because her people were part of this station, whether the galaxy liked it or not. What she wanted was quieter than politics. The evening before the human delegation was scheduled to leave, Danny made his way to the Noctari garden bay. The main doors were open, and the corridor outside smelled like damp earth and something faintly sweet that was already fading. He stepped inside and stopped. The bioluminescent plants that had once filled the space with soft blue and violet light were gone. The soil beds were dry. The stone pathways that wound between the planting rows were bare. It looked like a place where something beautiful had lived and then left. But not everything was dead. In the far corner, near the back wall where the temperature had dropped fastest when the power was restored, a handful of small plants were pushing up through the soil. Their stems were thin and pale, and their leaves were barely formed. But they were alive. The garden was already trying to come back. Seraphael was standing near the new growth, her hands at her sides, the glow beneath her skin soft and steady. She turned when she heard Danny's footsteps. She did not seem surprised to see him. "They are growing back," Danny said, looking at the small plants. "They will take years to reach what they were," Seraphael said. "The Valith especially. It does not rush. Good things usually do not." They stood together in the quiet dark for a while. The station hummed around them. Somewhere above, stars burned in patterns that neither of their species had named yet. "I will probably face a review when I get back to Earth," Danny said. "My superiors are not happy about the political fallout." "Do you regret it?" Seraphael asked. "No," he said without hesitation. "Not for a second." "General Valith has stopped arguing with me about the Accord," Seraphael said. "He still does not trust humans as a whole. But he told me this morning that he trusts you. That is not something he says easily." Danny smiled. "I will take it. He also said you work hard for someone so small. That is less flattering, but I will take that too." It was the closest Danny had seen her come to it. A slight softening at the corners of her mouth, a faint brightening of the glow along her cheekbones. On a Noctari, it was the equivalent of a full laugh. She turned to face him fully. "Why did you really do it, Danny? Not the answer you gave the council. Not the answer you gave your ambassador. The real one." Danny was quiet for a moment. He looked at the small plants growing in the dark soil, pushing toward nothing, reaching for a light that would never come, because they did not need it. "When I was a kid," he said slowly, "my parents moved a lot. New city every 2 years. New school, new faces, new everything. And every single time, there was this moment at the start where I would be standing in a room full of people who already knew each other, and I was the one nobody knew. Sometimes someone would come over and say hello, sometimes they would not. I learned that the people who are willing to cross the room are rare. Most people wait for someone else to go first. Most people are afraid of what it looks like to be the one who reaches out." He looked up at her. "I saw you standing alone, and I knew that feeling. I did not want to be the person who looked away." Seraphael was still for a long time. The glow beneath her skin shifted, moving in slow waves from her hands up through her arms, a pattern Danny had never seen before. Then she did something that made him hold his breath. She dimmed her bioluminescence completely, Every trace of light beneath her skin went dark. In the already dim garden, she became almost invisible, a shadow standing in shadow. Danny could barely see her outline. In Nocthari culture, dimming your glow in the presence of another was the deepest act of trust. It meant stripping away every defense, every signal, every visible marker of identity and power. It was the equivalent of standing completely bare before another being and saying, "This is what I look like when I am not trying to be anything. This is what I look like when I am just me." No Nocthari queen had done it before an outsider in recorded history. Danny did not step back. He did not flinch. He stood in the dark with her and let his eyes adjust until he could see her again, not by her glow, but by the faint starlight filtering through the garden's observation panels. She looked different without the light, softer, younger, real. "On Umbrath," she said, and her voice was quieter than he had ever heard it. "We have a saying. The first light is not the sun. It is the hand that finds yours in the dark." Danny reached out. He could not see his own hand clearly, but he held it open, palm up, the way he had done in the Grand Hall. He felt the cool touch of her fingers as she placed her hand over his. Her skin was smooth and cool and alive with a pulse he could feel, even without the glow. They stood like that in the dark garden, hand in hand, and the silence between them was not empty. It was full. It was the kind of silence that did not need words, because words would have been too small for what it held. After a long time, the glow beneath Seraphile's skin returned, slowly, like dawn coming to a world that had never seen the sun. It started at her fingertips, where her hand met his, and spread upward in gentle waves of violet and blue. The garden caught the light. The new plants seemed to lean toward it, as if they recognized something. Danny smiled. Seraphile let herself smile back. It was small and careful and real. And it was the most beautiful thing Danny had ever seen on any world. The next morning, the human delegation boarded their shuttle. Ambassador Marsh shook Danny's hand before he stepped aboard and told him she had spoken with Earth's diplomatic council. There would be a review, but she had recommended that it be a short one. She said she also recommended that Danny be assigned to a new post. "What post?" Danny asked. "The Noctari are opening a cultural exchange program," Marsh said. "Their first ever. They have requested a human coordinator, someone with a background in xenoanthropology and a demonstrated ability to work in the dark." She paused. "They specifically requested you." Danny looked out the shuttle window toward the Noctari section of the station. He could not see the garden from here, but he knew it was there. He knew the small plants were growing. He knew that somewhere in the dark, new roots were reaching down and new stems were reaching up. "I will need to pack differently," he said. Marsh shook her head. "Before I change my mind." 1 year later, Danny stood in the canyon gardens of Umbrath. The real gardens. Not the small replica on Hearth Point, but the vast living heart of the Noctari homeworld. The canyon walls rose 1,000 feet on either side, and every surface was covered in bioluminescent life. Plants glowed in shades of blue and violet and deep rose. Insects the size of Danny's hand drifted through the air, trailing light behind them like tiny comets. The air was cool and sweet and perfectly dark. The cultural exchange program had brought its first group of off-world visitors the previous month. Elawari botanists, Vreem marine biologists, and a small group of Fenori musicians who wanted to learn the low-frequency songs of the Noctari. Danny had coordinated all of it, and he had loved every minute. But his favorite part of each day was this: the quiet hour after the visitors left, when the gardens belonged to the night again, and he could walk the stone paths alone and listen to the sound of things growing in the dark. Not entirely alone. Seraphile walked beside him, her glow soft and steady, lighting their path without effort. She pointed to a section of the garden near the eastern wall. New plants grew there, different from the others. Their petals were white instead of blue, and they opened wide in the dark, releasing a scent that was sweet and familiar. Moonflowers, grown from seeds Danny had brought from Earth. They had been planted next to a bed of Valith, and the two species had grown together, their roots tangling beneath the soil, their stems leaning toward each other as if in conversation. The moonflowers glowed faintly with a light they had not possessed on Earth, as if the Noctari soil had given them something new. The Valith beside them bloomed wider than any Danny had seen, their translucent petals shimmering with reflected white light from their new neighbors. Two flowers from two different worlds, growing side by side in a garden where no sunlight ever reached. Danny looked at Seraphael. She was watching the flowers with an expression he could now read, because he had learned her face, the way he had learned her language and her customs and her world. It was joy, quiet, careful, Noctari joy, the kind that did not shout, but simply glowed. She took his hand, not because anyone was watching, not because protocol required it, just because she wanted to. The first light is not the sun, she said softly. Danny squeezed her hand. It is the hand that finds yours in the dark. Above them, the canyon walls rose into a sky full of stars that the Noctari had been naming for 10,000 years. Below them, the roots of two flowers from two different worlds held each other in the dark earth and grew towards something neither could have become alone. And in the garden where no sunlight ever reached, no sunlight was needed. There was already enough light. There had been, ever since a young man crossed a room full of strangers and held out his hand to the one person nobody else would choose. That was the thing about humans. They walked into the dark without waiting for the light. And sometimes, that made all the difference. Everyone found a match, but the alien vampire queen was overlooked until a human extended his hand. Part 1. The station called Hearthpoint hung in the emptiness between three star systems, like a city made of glass and steel. It was the largest neutral ground in the known galaxy, built 60 years ago when 400 species signed the Galactic Unity Accord and promised to stop killing each other. Every 10 years, the allied species sent their best diplomats to Hearthpoint for the Concord Gala. They came to trade, to argue, to smile at species they secretly hated, and to take part in an old tradition called the pairing rite. The pairing rite was simple. Every delegate had to find a partner from a different species. The two would stand together before the full assembly and join hands, or claws, or tentacles, or whatever their biology allowed. It was supposed to be a symbol of trust between worlds. If you stood alone at the end of the rite, it meant no one in the galaxy wanted you. It was a quiet shame that followed a species home for years. The human shuttle docked at Bay 14 on the third morning of arrivals. Ambassador Lena Marsh stepped off first, tall and sharp-eyed, with silver hair pulled back tight. She walked like someone who had spent 30 years making aliens take her seriously and had gotten very good at it. Behind her came her team of 6, all wearing the dark blue uniforms of Earth's diplomatic corps. Danny Calloway was the last one off the shuttle. He was 28, with brown hair that never stayed flat, and a habit of looking at everything like he was trying to memorize it. He was a junior cultural attaché, the lowest rank on the team, and this was his first time off Earth. He had studied alien cultures for 6 years in university, read thousands of files, watched countless hours of footage. But nothing had prepared him for the smell of Hearthpoint. It smelled like copper and flowers and something electric that made the hair on his arms stand up. The grand hall was enormous. The ceiling rose so high that clouds actually formed near the top, tiny wisps of moisture drifting in the recycled air. Delegations from dozens of species filled the space. The Elawari were hard to miss. They stood 9 feet tall, with skin like rough tree bark, and leaves growing from their shoulders. They moved slowly, and spoke in deep rumbling voices that Danny could feel in his chest. The Vreen were there too, fish-like beings sealed inside walking suits, filled with water, their translators bubbling and crackling as they talked. The Cathori clicked and hummed in tight groups, insect-like creatures with shiny black shells and too many legs. Danny stood near the edge of the hall and watched all of it, with wide eyes. Ambassador Marsh had already gone to work, shaking hands with an Elawari trade minister and laughing at something a Vreen diplomat said. The rest of the team scattered to their assignments. Danny was supposed to observe and take notes. That was his job. Watch and learn. He was good at watching. That was how he noticed her. She stood at the far end of the observation deck, away from the crowd, away from the light. She was tall, close to 7 feet, and her skin was the color of dark purple stone. Faint lines of soft light ran beneath her skin like glowing veins, tracing patterns along her arms and neck and face. Her eyes were deep red, not angry red, but the red of old embers, steady and warm and ancient. Her hair was black in a way that seemed to pull the light out of the air around it. She wore a long gown made of dark fabric that shifted and moved like water, even though she stood perfectly still. She was looking out at the stars. And she was completely alone. Danny turned to a Vreen diplomat standing nearby. "Who is that?" he asked quietly. The Vreen's water suit bubbled. Its translator clicked on. "That is Queen Seraphiel, ruler of the Noctari, sole monarch of Umbrath." The Vreen paused. "I would not approach her if I were you." The Vreen moved away quickly after that. Danny pulled out his datapad and searched the delegation files. The Noctari, a species from a tidally locked world called Umbrath, where one side always faced its sun and the other side stayed in permanent darkness. The Noctari lived in the narrow strip of twilight between the two halves, in cities carved into canyon walls. They were nocturnal. They fed on a glowing fluid produced by creatures native to their world. They were sensitive to bright light. They had joined the Accord 15 years ago, and the galaxy called them vampires. The word appeared again and again, in unofficial communications, in news reports, in the casual conversations of other species. Vampire aliens, blood drinkers, dark ones. None of it was accurate. The Noctari did not drink blood. They did not hunt other species. They were quiet, ancient, and deeply private. But fear did not need facts. Fear just needed a shadow to point at. He looked up from his pad and back at the observation deck. Seraphiel had not moved. She stood with her hands folded in front of her, watching the stars with an expression that Danny could not quite name. It was not sadness exactly. It was something older than sadness. Something that had been carried so long it had become part of the way she held herself. Danny checked the historical records for the pairing right. He scrolled through 10 years of data, then 20, then all the way back to when the Noctari first joined the Accord. In 15 years and 2 full gala cycles, Queen Seraphiel had never once been chosen for the right. She had attended every single time. She had stood in the hall while every other delegate found a partner, and every single time she had walked away alone. No one had ever picked her, not once. Danny put his datapad down and looked at her again. The light from the stars touched the faint glow beneath her skin, and for a moment she looked less like a queen and more like someone standing at the edge of a school playground, waiting for a name that never got called. He knew that feeling. He knew it well. He did not approach her that night. He was not ready. But he did not look away either. And from across the observation deck, standing in a pool of starlight, with 2 centuries of silence on her shoulders, Queen Seraphiel noticed. Someone was watching her, and for the first time in a very long time, that someone did not look afraid.